HiTOP as a path forward for research. Traditionally, research into mental disorders has been bound to categorical diagnoses like those in the DSM. The DSM carves psychopathology into discrete categories, separated by relatively crisp boundaries. Individuals are either members or non-members of certain diagnostic categories. Research designs like case-control studies divide samples into disordered and healthy groups, and randomized controlled trials often contain samples of heterogeneous individuals within the same diagnostic category. In this video, we will briefly describe a few key limitations of the DSM for research and explain how HiTOP can overcome these limitations. Key limitations of the DSM for research. Diagnostic heterogeneity. The checklist approach to diagnosis in the DSM results in substantial variability in individuals' symptom presentations. People with the same diagnosis can even share no symptoms in common. This means that study designs that rely on grouping people based on their diagnoses can miss important differences and limit our ability to make progress in identifying the mechanisms that underpin mental illness and to improve mental health treatment outcomes. Arbitrary thresholds. The arbitrary divide drawn between groups of people with versus without mental disorders can cause substantial problems in research. Most evidence suggests that psychopathology occurs on a continuum without clean categorical distinctions. People differ in degree, not kind. When we dichotomize people's naturally continuous characteristics into disordered and healthy groups in research, we discard valuable information about symptom severity, including collapsing sub-threshold cases with healthy controls. Comorbidity. Comorbidity is the norm for clinical populations, meaning that people rarely fit neatly into a single diagnostic category and instead tend to meet criteria for multiple disorders. This means that when studies focus on a single diagnosis and exclude individuals with comorbid diagnoses, the generalizability of the results to real-world populations is compromised. Alternatively, when studies do include individuals with comorbid diagnoses, it can be difficult, if not impossible, to disentangle the effects of co-occurring conditions on the outcomes of interest, limiting what we can learn from the results. The hierarchical taxonomy of psychopathology, or HiTOP for short, can address these limitations in research. HiTOP is a data-driven diagnostic framework representing a new way to map the landscape of mental health conditions as a hierarchy of dimensions that follow the patterns in how domains of psychopathology co-vary. Advantages of dimensions. Each component in the HiTOP model is dimensional, in line with current evidence. In research, this means we can calculate an individual's profile that places them somewhere along a continuum from low to high levels for each component. This avoids the need to divide the sample into groups based on arbitrary thresholds. Valuable information about symptom severity is preserved, enabling more accurate and reliable measurement of the domains of interest. Advantages of hierarchical structure. The hierarchy of dimensions in HiTOP is derived from the research evidence on the structure of psychopathology, nesting narrower empirically derived constructs under broader ones. Following these patterns in the data reduces diagnostic heterogeneity, and the dimensions turn patterns of comorbidity among diagnoses into a signal, rather than creating noise and difficulties drawing conclusions. The breadth of HiTOP, together with the hierarchical structure, ranging from very narrow to very broad domains of psychopathology, means researchers can zoom in, or out, to select the variables of interest and pinpoint which ones have the most predictive power for their outcomes of interest. This creates avenues to explore entirely new research questions and means that we can learn more from the data we collect. For example, imagine we are conducting a study in participants with borderline personality disorder and/or a substance use disorder to understand what predicts relationship difficulties. In a DSM framework, the focus would be on determining whether either or both of the diagnoses have unique associations with relationship problems. From a HiTOP perspective, we can break the heterogeneous diagnosis of borderline personality disorder down into components from the alternative model of personality disorders, such as emotional lability, anxiousness, separation insecurity, depressivity, impulsivity, risk-taking, and hostility. In substance use disorders, we can distinguish between components like drug use and drug problems. The literature also highlights close associations for substance use disorders with the negative emotionality, impulsivity, and risk-taking components of borderline personality disorder. The HiTOP framework allows us to map each component dimensionally for each participant, rather than arbitrarily dividing the sample into disordered versus healthy groups for comparison, providing more reliability in the measurement of psychopathology and more statistical power to answer our research questions. Comorbidity also becomes a signal that can point to the transdiagnostic dimensions of interest, such as internalizing and externalizing spectra. The hierarchical framework means we can analyze our sample at different levels of resolution to disentangle which specific elements best predict relationship difficulties. We can start at the level of the broad transdiagnostic dimensions to test whether internalizing versus externalizing can summarize the patterns in the components, or drill down to understand whether specific symptom domains are particularly important predictors. In this way, the HiTOP framework allows us to pinpoint the specific domains of psychopathology, whether that be broad or specific elements, that predict relationship difficulties. HiTOP can unite and integrate research. Within the HiTOP framework, researchers can integrate previously fragmented literatures. Traditional research occurs mostly in disorder-specific silos. This creates a fragmented knowledge system within psychology where progress related to one disorder does not typically intersect with research for other disorders. However, HiTOP's hierarchical structure allows for the exploration of transdiagnostic constructs that cut across the boundaries of traditional disorders. Researchers can use their existing disorder-focused data to model these transdiagnostic dimensions to provide a different lens on the patterns in the data and gain new insights. However, it will be even more valuable to design future research with the HiTOP framework in mind, moving beyond traditional categorical diagnoses to overcome their baked-in limitations like diagnostic heterogeneity and symptom repetition. Using empirically derived constructs as the building blocks for research is an exciting path to accelerate progress in fields like neurobiology, genetics, and biomarker research to help us understand what traditional diagnoses may have been obscuring in these fields. HiTOP promises to overcome the limitations of traditional research bound to categorical diagnoses by creating a data-driven, dimensional, and hierarchical map of psychopathology. The framework has the potential to unite siloed fields and generate valuable new insights into the causes and manifestations of mental illness.